It was Christmas night, and the sky had been a solid black for hours, swallowing the sparse light of the distant town. The snow lay thick across the hills, softening the edges of the landscape and muffling the world into a quiet I didn't know how to carry. I found myself wandering through the old cemetery behind my grandparents' house, a place I had always avoided after dark, yet tonight something had driven me past that caution. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was just the reckless curiosity that comes when you've spent too many years thinking you're braver than you are. My boots pressed into the powdery snow, leaving footprints that seemed almost obscene against the weight of history buried beneath. The crunch of each step echoed like a drumbeat in the still night, the sound sharp against the hush of gravestones leaning in every which way, names long faded, dates worn smooth. I told myself it was just the snow, that there was no reason to feel the unease curling up my spine, but soon the wind began to carry something else. At first, I thought it was the trees, skeletal and bare, whispering in the cold gusts. But the murmurs weren't in the language of branches. They were deliberate, soft syllables carried just beyond comprehension. Like someone was walking behind me, whispering words I couldn't quite catch. I spun around, heart hammering, but the cemetery was empty. Only the dark stretched out in every direction, broken by the flickering glow of the lone lamp near the family plot. I told myself it was my imagination, the way shadows move and play tricks on tired eyes. But every time I tried to convince myself of that, I heard my name, drawn out slow, deliberate, like it had weight, like it was being breathed through the snow itself. The lamplight cast long fingers across the frozen ground, and I noticed shadows shifting just beyond its reach, flickering, vanishing, always teasing, never stepping into the light. I kept walking, though my pace slowed, the sense of being watched settling heavier with each step. The old family plot came into view, the stones worn with age, leaning like weary men bowed by the weight of years. I had always loved this place as a kid, the way the snow made it feel sacred, almost untouched, but tonight it felt different. The cold was sharper here, the silence more complete, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was there, just beyond sight, following me without moving. I crouched to brush snow off one of the stones, and that's when I noticed it. Tiny footprints in the fresh snow that hadn't been there before. Not mine. Not animal tracks. They were human, small, irregular, and heading nowhere in particular. I froze, and the whispering rose around me, not in words this time, but in low, rushing breaths that didn't belong to me. My heartbeat thudded painfully in my chest, and I wanted to run, but some part of me, the same part that had gotten me here, urged me to stay to see it, whatever it was. The wind shifted, and I could swear I felt a presence beside me, closer than anyone should be without being seen. The snow underfoot seemed to hold its breath, waiting, and I imagined the shadows watching, waiting with it. I tried to convince myself that it was loneliness speaking, that the cemetery itself was just a collection of old stones and frost. But then the whispers became more distinct, just barely audible. Don't go. Not harsh, not commanding, just an insistent plea, almost human. I swung my head, flashlight trembling in hand, catching the gleam of frost-coated branches, but nothing more. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, yet I stayed, drawn forward as if some unseen force had a tether on my ankle. The air was thick, the cold almost alive, and I could feel it pressing in, nudging me, testing me. Time lost its meaning. I don't know how long I crouched there, staring at the gravestones, listening to the snow whisper and the shadows twitch. The world had reduced to two things, the eerie hush of the cemetery and the sense that whatever was out there, it was learning me, learning how I moved, how I breathed, how I flinched. And I knew, with a certainty that didn't require thought, that I was not meant to be here. The snow, the shadows, the wind, all of it had a memory, and it was recording mine. Finally, I forced myself up, trudging back through the snow toward the faint lights of home, each step heavier than the last, as if I were wading through molasses rather than powder. Behind me, I imagined the shadows stretching after me, and the whispers followed, fading but never leaving entirely. I reached the edge of the cemetery and dared to look back. The lamp still burned, steady now, but I could have sworn I saw shapes moving in the corners of my vision, lingering just at the edge of understanding. I left that night changed in ways I can't explain. The snow still covers that cemetery every winter, just as thick and silent, but when I drive past, I never linger. I can feel the weight of eyes that never blink, the soft insistence of whispers that call my name when no one else is near. I think about the part of myself I left behind that night, crouched among the gravestones, listening. I think about how it watches me now, every Christmas, waiting for the next time I might wander too close. The memory of that night has grown with me, a quiet, gnawing presence that has no shape and no voice, and yet I know it's always there, just beyond the snow, just beyond the lamplight, just beyond the reach of my understanding. I never should have agreed to that dare, but pride has a way of outweighing common sense, especially when you're 17 and the cold has made your blood thicken into stubborn recklessness. It was Christmas night, bitter and still, and I found myself standing at the edge of the oldest section of the cemetery behind my grandparents' farm. The air smelled sharp with frost and old pine, and the snow crunched under my boots like brittle bones. I knew the stories about that part of the cemetery, the stones leaning and cracked, some sunk so far into the earth that only the tops showed, inscriptions worn into nothing. Even in the daytime, it had a hollow kind of quiet that felt alive. At night, it was suffocating. I took a deep breath and started singing. The carol I picked was one I thought I knew, the kind that seemed cheerful enough to make this dare tolerable. But the first few notes felt wrong in the cold night air, bouncing off the marble stones in strange ways, twisting and lagging, as if the cemetery itself was altering the sound. I laughed nervously, telling myself it was just the wind, just my voice finding its way through frozen gravestones. I imagined my friends crouched behind some leaning monument, grinning at the ridiculousness of it all. That thought made me laugh again, a short, tight sound that died in my throat when I heard another note echo back. Slightly off, slightly slower than my own. At first, I thought it was an echo, the wind carrying my voice in weird patterns, but soon the echoes became something else. The melody I sang slipped into silence only to return with sharp, hollow variations, notes bending as though someone had joined me, someone who knew the tune perfectly but sang it wrong, in a way that felt unnatural. My laughter died completely when I heard soft footsteps on the snow behind me. Careful, deliberate, not crushing it but moving in rhythm with the song. I stopped singing, and the footsteps stopped. My breath came in ragged puffs, and for a moment, there was only the snow and the cold and the stones leaning like tired old men. I tried to convince myself it was a friend, maybe one of the guys hiding out of sight trying to scare me. But then came the humming, soft and deliberate, a tune that matched my carol but was deeper, more resonant, almost sad. I swallowed hard, the sound crawling under my skin like smoke. Every instinct I had told me to run, but the ground seemed to clutch at my boots, the snow compacting underfoot as though holding me there, urging me to continue the song. My voice came back reluctantly, shaking with cold and fear, but the melody twisted in response, not quite matching, not quite mine. Each verse felt like a test. I could hear breaths where there should be none, faint puffs of air brushing against my ears, and I realized that something, or someone, was moving with me, perfectly silent except for the echo of its voice. I wanted to leave, but every step toward the perimeter felt like wading through molasses. The cemetery itself seemed to grow around me, the stones leaning closer, the shadows thickening, the snow compacting into shapes that weren't there before. My voice cracked, my throat raw, and I stumbled over a low, broken headstone, catching myself on a crooked marble marker. That's when I understood I wasn't alone. There was a presence, patient, silent, holding its own melody against mine, learning it, bending it to something that didn't belong. I stopped singing again, hoping to confuse it, hoping to break whatever grip the night had over me. But the air seemed heavier now, the frost crawling along my neck and hands as if it had memory, as if it remembered other nights like this, other voices that had dared to disturb the silence. The echo returned, not mine, not quite, and I realized it had memorized every note I had sung. I backed away slowly, my boots leaving uneven prints, but the presence mirrored me, just beyond the edge of the stones, moving like a shadow that refused form. My voice faltered as I tried one last carol, quieter now, almost a whisper, and it responded perfectly, a ghostly harmony that tightened my chest and made my teeth chatter. I stumbled toward the edge of the cemetery, away from the leaning stones and the cold, and finally broke into a run. Snow sprayed around me, biting my legs, and I dared a glance over my shoulder. The shadows remained, but they didn't chase. They simply waited. When I finally reached the warmth of my grandparents' house, I collapsed into the doorway, gasping, my voice gone, my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my ears. My friends weren't there. The dare had been forgotten. I was alone. But I could still hear it, the faint echo of my own melody, the way it had learned my voice, singing it somewhere out there in the darkness, among the stones that had swallowed centuries of whispers. That night left a mark I still carry. Even now, I hear the carol when the wind is right, when the snow falls heavy, and I remember the feeling of being watched, of my song claimed by something that isn't human but isn't entirely gone. I never returned to that section of the cemetery after that night, and I never sang alone again. The experience lingers in the small, quiet moments, in the hush of falling snow, in the way the shadows shift in the corner of my vision. It's a memory that crawls into your bones, a reminder that some places remember every note, every step, every breath. And if you dare to sing, even on a night meant for joy, you may find your song has a new companion, one that knows it better than you ever could. I had always avoided the little chapel at the center of the cemetery, the one everyone said was abandoned for decades. Its windows were dark and broken, streaked with frost and grime, and snow piled against the doors like it was trying to keep something in, or something out. My grandparents had warned me not to go near it after dark, but Christmas night has a way of bending caution, especially when curiosity gnaws harder than fear. I found myself standing there, flashlight in hand, heart hammering, feeling drawn to the place as though some quiet insistence had led me. The air was sharp, heavy with frost, and every breath came out in a visible cloud, a fragile puff of warmth swallowed immediately by the cold. The first step inside felt wrong, like stepping into a story that wasn't meant for me. The door creaked in a long, hollow groan, and the sound seemed to echo across the empty room, though there were no walls to carry it. Frost glittered on the pews, covering them in a crystalline sheen that caught the flashlight in tiny stabbing points of light. The floorboards moaned under my weight, responding to each careful step, but the silence between the creaks was worse, absolute, as though the chapel was holding its breath. I thought I saw something move in the far corner, a flicker of shadow that vanished the moment I focused on it. My chest tightened. I told myself it was the play of the light, the trick of tired eyes. Still, the feeling lingered, crawling down my spine. I stepped further in, drawn toward the altar, and with every movement, the air grew colder. My breath fogged in front of me, drifting lazily before vanishing into the darkness. I could feel eyes on me, though when I spun around, nothing met my gaze. The sensation was constant, unblinking, heavy and patient, as if the chapel itself remembered me, or all the people who had ever dared to enter. The floorboards groaned again, and I froze, convinced I'd hear something behind me. Nothing came. Yet the weight of being watched pressed in like a second skin. When I reached the altar, I nearly tripped over the edge of a rotted step, and that's when I saw it, a single candle burning in the center of the altar. Its flame flickered gently, impossibly bright against the cold and the darkness, and yet I hadn't seen anyone strike a match. I crouched, unsure whether to move closer or retreat, and my hand hovered in midair. The warmth from the candle was faint but noticeable, and the chapel seemed to bend around it, the shadows pulling inward as though acknowledging its presence. Then I heard the whisper, low and deliberate, sliding over the frost-covered air. "You shouldn't be here." The voice wasn't angry, wasn't threatening in any traditional sense. It carried the weight of time itself, centuries of watchfulness, of secrets folded into the walls and rafters. My throat went dry, and I wanted to answer, to apologize for disturbing whatever had lingered here, but words caught in my chest. I could feel the history of the chapel pressing in, each rotting pew and splintered beam heavy with memory, each shadow a ghost of who had walked these floors before me. The candle burned steadily, and I realized I was alone in the chapel, yet profoundly, unbearably not alone. I stepped back, trying to make my exit seem deliberate rather than panicked. The floorboards groaned beneath my boots as I reached the doorway, and the snow outside glinted cold and white, waiting to reclaim me. I dared one last glance inside. The candle's flame still burned bright, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw a figure kneeling in the shadows, its head bowed, almost reverent. When I blinked, it was gone, melted into the darkness. The chapel was silent again, except for the faint creak of old wood settling. Outside, the cold hit me like a wave, sharp and immediate, and I ran down the path, my boots crunching through the snow, chest heaving, flashlight bobbing. The cemetery stretched quiet and endless around me, gravestones leaning and frost-laden, but I didn't slow. My lungs burned, my heart rattled, and yet, deep inside, I knew the chapel was still watching, still remembering. Every step away was a compromise, a silent agreement with some invisible presence I couldn't name. When I finally reached the warmth of my grandparents' house, I stayed in the doorway for a long time, listening to the wind whip across the hills, every sound amplified in my nerves. The chapel's shape and smell lingered in my mind, the cold bite of frost, the creak of rotting wood, the impossibly steady candle flame, and I realized some memories aren't left behind in the snow or the dark. They follow you, patient and waiting, tucked behind the eyes and the spine. That night has stayed with me all these years, resurfacing whenever the wind rises just right, or the snow drifts thick and silent across the hills. Even now, I think about returning, though fear always wins. I imagine the chapel's shadows stretching toward me, the whisper brushing my ears, and the candle flickering without anyone tending it. I know, deep down, that it remembers me, and I remember it, an encounter not of violence or malice, but of quiet inevitability, the kind that sits in your chest and presses down until you feel the weight of centuries. Some places don't just stay abandoned. They stay alive, keeping track of every step, every breath, every foolish curiosity that dares to enter. And for me, the chapel waits, patient as the frost, whispering truths I cannot understand, offering no closure, only the lingering chill of being observed long after I fled.